important point, which a lot of people reacted to a great extent. However, we had no inkling that the social networks were so effective, social media was so effective. We had no inkling that people of many disparate backgrounds could come together and sustain an organized response to a police intervention which was growing brutally every day. And all of this were totally unknown, and we had no earlier research indicating any of this happening at this scale. Under these circumstances, the protests were, furthermore, the protests were very peaceful. Out of these 2.5 million, only 4,500 had been interrogated by the police. And the police pressed charges against 200 to 300 of them so far. So these are a minuscule 2 in 1,000 of those who participated, less than 1%. So a very small proportion of people tended to be violent, and majority of people tremendously peaceful, and they tried to inhibit these people from showing a face that they did not necessarily share. That is, they didn't approve of the violence that these people had been perpetrating. So all of this is pretty new. And finally, the small and medium businesses in and around the Taksim Gezi Park on the 28th of May through the 2nd and 3rd of June gave considerable amount of support to these protesters who were peacefully protesting, and police had been using excessive brutal force to suppress them. They opened their shops to them, which is, again, unprecedented, never happened before, and also big business, such as the Koç Group and their Hotel Divan and other hotels in the area, five-star international hotel chains, etc., opened their doors to these people who were running away from the gas peppered on them by the police in excessive amounts. I mean, the amount of gas they used on these people in these 15 days was tantamount to the entire stockpile of gas of 1 year, 365 days. That's the amount of gas that they used on these people. And there was excessive use of gas by any standard. So all of this is pretty much a first, and it precipitated a series of civil society networking, which is still continuing. People are getting together, meeting in town halls, and initiating public discussions about how they could take the reins of their own affairs into their own hands in their small communities, etc. And that is a very good sign that there is some life in civil society in Turkey after about 60 years of multi-party democracy. I think that is what I can give you as an insight about what happened and what we're looking at the moment.
Thank you so much. That's a great start. And you cannot see, but the 6 people you have mentioned, I don't know if you can see the columns behind me. We have their pictures, and around our walls, we do have an art exhibit which we put together to demonstrate the police brutality that you have mentioned. So folks around us are no stranger to that. And thanks for mentioning the rule of law. We'll come back to it. I have a question specifically for that, referencing to your book. I want to continue with Sayın Yesillada. What economic conditions, if any, exist that fueled these protests? From abroad, economic development in Turkey looks good on paper, but it seems to be hollow and unsustainable as it heavily relies on construction spending and account deficits. Can you please expand on that?
Thanks, Kürşat. First of all, a small correction. I don't have a PhD from University of California, Santa Barbara. I was honorably discharged with a master's degree. Just in case they decide to sue me, I want to clear this point. The whole Gezi Park event is just so momentous and so transformational that it probably deserves a PhD, which I should still get one day. But I would say the discharge of the social energy is the result of what we call the cliffhanger effects in economics. A lot of small things that accumulate over time. Each of them are perhaps trivial or very small, but at the end, the pressure under the fault line becomes so large that we have a volcano or earthquake. From an economic viewpoint, I could speculate several reasons about why Gezi Park is started. Obviously, these are observations that remain to be verified by serious research, which I'm obviously not capable of, as University of California has politely informed me. First of all, Gezi Park is not unique to Turkey. We have seen pre-runners of this type of affairs in Russia and China, of course, but simultaneously with Turkey, Brazil, Bulgaria, and a couple of more countries that I forget at this moment, well, Egypt as well, exploded. It appears that the phenomenal success of developing economies to create urbanite, pro-West middle class has created its own problems. In that sense, it's sort of a taxpayers' revolt. The new middle class wants more political inclusion. It wants to have more of a say in the way their tax monies are used, in the way their neighborhoods are managed, in the way the government runs the country. The second viewpoint here is, as you mentioned, Turkey has grown very rapidly, but whether it has developed as rapidly is a different question. Turkey has averaged about 5% per annum GDP growth since AKP came to power. But according to Denny Roderick, a viewpoint I agree with, quite a large portion of that is because the dollar depreciated against Turkish currency. As a result, we have borrowed from abroad to sustain a consumption and construction boom that's clearly not sustainable. Even though global liquidity conditions continued as fairly ample, according to IMF, since 2010, the average growth rate of developing economies has declined by 1.5 percentage points. In Turkey, that decline has been even more impressive and devastating. Coming out of the Lehman crisis, I think we have grown faster than 7-8% per annum clip. In 2012 and 13, growth will average at best 3%. Obviously, that reflects to people's living standards and adds to their concerns about the future. Thirdly, economic exclusion is one of the fundamental reasons of this particular people who congregated in 79 provinces, as Dr. Kalaycioglu mentioned. Turkey has never been a merit society, I'll admit it, but under AKP it has really become a caste society, an apartheid society. Only corporates that are close to AKP or that are part of the Sunni congregations can get public tenders. In terms of civil service employment, the only credentials you need is from the imam of the mosque. Clearly, the well-educated and extremely clever and ambitious people, young people of Turkey, have decided that in AKP's future, they really have no role to play because they are too secular. Finally, one cause of the rapid growth that AKP has presumably achieved has been the environment and the rapid gentrification of all the major cities, but most notably Istanbul. AKP simply does not understand that environment has an economic value. And if one is about to go about it, about destroying it, to build hydroelectric dams, nuclear power plants, etc., there must be an environmental impact assessment. A very convincing economic point needs to be made that the benefits from this project that would accrue over the years are far higher than the accumulated costs of destroying the livelihood of the people, environmental risks, degradation, etc., etc. These are conducted in Turkey, but you know they are very pro forma. Essentially, if AKP wants something to be built, it gets built. And that causes massive disappointment and disappointment in many peoples. Istanbul has been completely facelifted over the last 10 years. Really, I am 55 years old, and I've lived in Istanbul through most of my life, except the prison terms I've served abroad. But there is nothing left that connects me to my past. All the landmark buildings are either destroyed or out of order, something like that. And that also creates a massive sense of alienation in the people. Essentially, one morning you wake up and you see the bulldozers come in and raise a part of your neighborhood either for urban renewal or for some kind of highway project. And that's very devastating. It's also not economically smart. The examples of London and Paris, as well as other cities, show us that preserving the historical heritage has an economic value. I mean, you know, their tourism revenues are much more impressive compared to ours. Raising everything that's older than 20 years and building just faceless and soulless shopping centers instead of them is not good economic sense. I think all of these things, none of which by itself would have caused such a massive reaction from the people, have contributed to the Gezi Parkı. In closing, as Dr. Kalaycioglu said again, the government's callousness to our lifestyles and to our demands and wishes as taxpayers continue today. The pent-up energy that was manifested in Gezi Parkı protests may have dissipated for the time being, but thanks to AKP, I'm fairly sure, come next spring, we'll see even bigger protests, possibly by the broader participation of Alawites, Kurds, and most importantly, those who protest Turkey's contribution to the war in Syria.
Thank you. I'm told that I need to scream louder because folks behind don't hear, so I apologize to our guests in Turkey. Thank you. Because when I speak louder, I sound like a 5-year-old. I'm trying to avoid that. But I'd like to underline a few sentences you included, Sayın Yesillada. Environment has economic value, historic heritage has economic value, and the distinction between growth versus development. And lastly, next spring, we could see bigger events. These are, I think, worth remembering. I took notes. I'll continue with Sayın Sozen. And the folks in the back, can you hear me now? Could you repeat the question? I haven't asked the question yet. On your blog page, Sayın Sozen, Politics Matter, August 7, 2013. You wrote about the administration's strategy to contain and discredit the Gezi movement.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about it and whether or not it has been successful? Why were they two different voices from the Prime Minister and the President, Abdullah Gül? And is there a winner in this conflict? And if so,
I couldn't hear the last part. Sorry, I couldn't hear the last sentence.
I was mentioning the differences in their response. Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan and the President Abdullah Gül. My question is there a winner in this bifurcation? And if so, who is that?
Okay. I kind of would like to say a couple of sentences.
Sayın Sozen, hold on.
Can you hear?
Just 1 second, hold on.
Sure.
Sayın Sozen, I'm asked to repeat the question to the crowd. Give me just 1 second.
Sure.
Like this? Yeah. Okay, the question is, on Yunus Sozen in his blog, he mentioned that the government strategy to contain and discredit Gezi protests I just want them to talk about it. What was their strategy? What was their reaction? And whether or not it has worked. That's the first question. Second question is, why were they two different voices from the Prime Minister and the President, and whether or not there's a winner in this bifurcation in their response? Cool? All right, thank you.
Okay. So I would like to first add a couple of sentences to Professor Kalaycioglu's presentation about the causes, and then answer your question about government strategies to contain the uprising. I'm not going to elaborate on it. I was thinking of elaborating more, but I think what happened is why all these people, in the face of such a massive governmental crackdown, took such a big risk about their well-being, their liberties, their bodies. Why did they take such a risk? And the answer, I think, is that authoritarianism is a developing authoritarianism in Turkey provides part of the answer, but not all the answer. Turkish regime in the last 5-6 years turned increasingly authoritarian in the way that Professor Kalaycioglu mentioned, in the way that executive power within the center, executive power accumulated enormous amount of power. If executive, that is the government, the ruling party, I mean here, if executive gets so much power and becomes a monolithic force in determining policy, what they do with that power becomes extremely important. So people did not react solely or only to disappearing avenues of dissent, that is authoritarianism. Authoritarianism here means no governmental check on power at the constitutional judicial level, and no opposition freedoms in terms of political competition. So basically, if you kind of crack down on the freedom of press, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, did I already say that? Anyway, freedom of association. If you kind of crack down on these freedoms, what you are going to get is you are going to suffocate the opposition. The suffocation of opposition is the first sign of growing authoritarianism. So if you have that, and on top of that, if those whose power cannot be checked anymore start carrying out conservative, right-wing, and exclusionary policies, then you may kind of start to make sense, at least take some steps in making sense of why people took such a big risk in getting out there and exposing themselves to bodily harm. So I think that's the very general framework of what caused the Gezi events. But about your question, what did AKP, I will use the word AKP, not AKP or JDP. What did AKP do in response to this historic uprising is, I think they carried out like a double strategy. On the one hand, they tried to contain or consolidate, on the one hand, they tried to consolidate their own ranks as in their own supporting base. So to do that, and the second one, of course, is trying to imprison the Gezi protesters into a specific social base. That is upper middle class, white Turks who are Kemalist and drawn to authoritarianism. So these two strategies. First of all, they tried to consolidate their own base, which was just to make sure that their supporters do not quit on them. Secondly is to manufacture the legitimacy that they used to have before the events in the general public. I think again, about your question, the first of these strategies worked out well for them. They could consolidate their own base. The second one, to keep going with their general legitimacy, or and containing the rioters as upper middle class authoritarian segments of the population, I think failed massively as well. So it's kind of like they failed some and they won some. The idea, like of course, I'm giving up. There is also another, this international conspiracy theories that government, expressed several times, but they are like wacky, so I'm not kind of like gonna build on it, and I don't think that had any popular repercussions. So, about consolidating their own base, why did they manage to succeed in it? That's an important question, I think. Why could they, like now we see that AKP supporters, like very much before the Gezi events, are for the government. Why could they manage that? How could they manage to consolidate their power? I think the reason is that AKP's ideology of conservative populism had given certain segments of the population quite a lot already. Previously excluded groups such as conservative religious masses, previously excluded before AKP's arrival to power, could manage to get symbolic and material benefits out of the AKP's government. So symbolic benefits are not like very little. They kind of became, after the AKP's rule up for 12 years, they kind of became part of the definition of the right citizens. Now they kind of feel more than ever that they own the country. Like, I'm not, of course, enumerating the material benefits, but like this part is extremely important. That's a special bond that a populist party builds with its own social base. And this social base, this special connection makes whatever they say more believable to its own base. So those people who AKP managed to include into the system, managed to incorporate into the political system, managed to give symbolic benefits and exalted their social status, ended up being much more receptive to AKP's version of events. So what was that version of events? Like, it was, for example, Gezi protesters were not protesting for democracy and for secularism, for more egalitarianism, like public park, etc. Gezi protesters are out to get you, are out to get your social status, are out to get your newly found social power. So if you kind of keep in mind that AKP included these people, this social base, when you frame the events as they want to get back what we gave you, it becomes a much more believable lie. Some things that sound like quite not believable to us, like, for example, people drank in the mosques, or people attacked headscarf people all over the place. All of these become a believable lies. So that's why it worked. That's why they could manage to consolidate their own base. But the second part, the way to reframe the social base of the protesters as just Kemalists, just Kemalist secular upper middle classes who are like drawn to authoritarianism, failed. I think this did not work out because it was not done just to the protesters, just to the social base, who were much more receptive to AKP's propaganda. It was tried to derive a general legitimacy. It tried to change the whole public perception of the event, and that did not fly very well. There are three reasons why this was like wrong. First of all, in the Gezi Park events, the protesters were not confined to a particular social group. They were not middle class, upper middle class only. They were not only Kemalists. In the park, there were LGBT supporters, there were green groups, obviously, that they initiated, socialists that they also initiated, all kinds of socialists, by the way, from TKP to ÖDP, all kinds of socialists, even DİSİP, which was supporting AKP quite a bit before, was there. All kinds of Kurdish groups were there. So like the protests were much more diverse than AKP wanted us to believe in. Also, the second reason why they couldn't manage to successfully propagate this idea is that sometimes who the protesters are is irrelevant in a protest. What they say, what they demand is much more important. And over there, people were reacting to authoritarian conservatism. Like you may be a Kemalist and you may have authoritarian leanings, but if you are out there for freedom of speech or freedom of press, then that makes your demand democratic, no matter what your ideal political regime is. So the demand over there was much more egalitarian, much more pro-liberal, pro-freedoms than maybe even the social base that was there. So that's the second reason why that didn't fly well. The AKP's reframing strategy did not fly well. And the third one is opposition and the protesters did not have that much power. Like if they are authoritarian, to be able to be authoritarian and to be able to manufacture an authoritarian regime are entirely different things. Without having any power, how are you going to have an authoritarian regime? Like, you know, think about a situation where, let's not imagine, let's talk about Turkey. AKP holds all the power in the three branches, basically. Judiciary cannot limit them, and the other two are in a parliamentary system, naturally belongs to them. And also, like, they have suffocated the opposition. Freedom of press is almost completely non-existent in Turkey. So all these three branches belong to them. So what are you going to do? Army and police were together suppressing the events. Like, who is going to carry out the coup? Who's going to carry out those supposed authoritarian desires of the protesters? So, like, in the face of weakness of the protesters, political institutional weakness of the protesters, in the face of their diversity, in the face of their democratic demands, the AKP's second strategy, that is to reframe the social base as authoritarian and solely upper middle class, did not work well. So that's my answer. They could consolidate their own base, but they could not reclaim the ideological hegemony. That's it.
May I a little bit Yunus's comments?
Sure. Yes, please.
Look, the Gezi Park incident was a big existential problem for the AKP government. For the AKP government had been propagating that the world is divided into white and black. They are ak, which means white in Turkish, and the rest of the world is black. And therefore, all those who are opposing the AKP government are authoritarian, militarist, fascists, or enemies of the Turkish people, or the Turkish state. And there are all sorts of them. Therefore, there has been a problem of social stigmatization going on for a long time. Now, Gezi incident was a big blow to this propaganda by the government. For all these disparate groups came together. Yunus forgot to mention that there were Islamists within these groups as well.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I forgot.
They played a major role. Yeah, they were these anti-capitalist Islamists. They were reacting to crony capitalist practices of the government. Especially the major reaction was towards the developer construction company lobby. That's the basic target. That's the basic criticism that these groups were uniting around, that these people are wreaking havoc in all the cities, not only in Istanbul, throughout the country. They have turned the country into a construction site, and they don't heed any kind of limitations, ecology, or legality, or anything doesn't work for them. They make a deal with the government, especially with the Prime Minister's office, and they get whatever they want, and there is unhindered. So they can grab your property, they can build anywhere they want without any restriction. So this is what they've been reacting to. And therefore, this government discovered that these people that they were trying to antagonize and cast in the image of the enemy suddenly started to talk to each other. When I visited the Gezi Park, there were all these disparate groups coming together and discussing public issues without fighting, without necessarily attacking each other, without insulting each other. They began a dialogue among themselves and discovered that these people were not enemies. They were just like people like themselves. They have their own points of view and they could live with that. And that, of course, was basic anathema for the government. That was a basic blow to their entire propaganda machine, which has been going on for a long while, that they were the white forces fighting against evil, and this evil suddenly turned out to be a phony baloney. There is no such evil out there, and in fact these people could come together, agree on issues, and they can build coalitions on issues and resist the government. And therefore they tried very hard with their spin doctors in the media to reinvent this image of the other, this damaging image, and they are now still continuing on with this. They now recreated this image following the events in Egypt. Now we have the famous image of four, the hen, Rabia image, versus Gezi Park, and they're mobilizing their forces and rallying them around that symbol as opposed to the Gezi Park symbol. So there are now two crowds that they can effectively, again, use to antagonize, divide, and make them fight each other. And that's how they're trying to manage the situation. And we don't know whether this is going to work. For the time being, it seems as if they can bring out crowds around these new reinvented symbolism, Islamism, etc., and trying to recreate this image and salvage this image of Turkey as a country divided between white forces and black forces, and the white forces are represented by AKP. All the rest, all the opposition parties, all political forces, all intellectuals, everybody who is not following the line of AKP is an enemy of the AKP, enemy of democracy, enemy of the people, etc. So this is where we seem to be standing, and we will discover over the events of this year into the election campaign. We have local elections coming up, and then presidential elections again for the first time in Turkish history. Then we will discover whether this the propaganda machine is effective or not.
Salı sabahı başka bir televizyon yayını. Abi şu anda kapatayım seni.
Thank you so much. I was watching a show, Taha Akyol's, on CNN Turk, and he had professors from the Faculty of Religious Studies, İlahiyat Fakültesi. Even they were finding the authoritarian conservatism that Yunus mentioned and top-down approach too harsh, more harsh than 28 Şubat period, February 28th period. And as you mentioned, Sayın Kalaycioglu, it does seem like polarization of the society seems to be the strategy of AKP. Since we were, let's continue with you, Sayın Kalaycioglu. Let's talk about your book, The Rising Tide of Conservatism in Turkey. You wrote with Ali Çarkoğlu. Can you tell us about this trend, the conservatism, and whether or not it does, like any other tide, it will ebb and flow? In other words, will there be a reversal of this conservatism? Will the pendulum swing, or is this a phenomena here to stay? And before you answer, please allow me to ask the question for the folks behind me, because they can't hear me when I talk to you.
Of course.
So the question is, referencing to Ersin Kalaycioglu's book, Rising Tide of Conservatism in Turkey, my question to him is, well, what is this trend? How strong is it? And like any other tide, will it ebb and flow? In other words, will the pendulum swing, and will the conservatism trend will reverse itself, or is it here to stay and we have to just get used to it? Was my question. Thank you.
Well, I have been doing surveys, some of them in recent times with Ali Çarkoğlu, most of them actually, and some of them are focused on the elections. We had mass surveys prior to the 2002, 2007, 2011 national legislative elections, and after these elections, immediately after them. And we have been analyzing these elections and trying to understand how people voted and why. it looks as if there are three main reasons why people seem to be voting the way they do. One is the economy. We talked about it. There are goodies that's coming out of this economy. For a lot of people, they seem to be benefiting from it, and the economy seems to have been doing well after 2002, when the AKP came to power, and as a result of which they seem to be rewarding the government back. Second reason is upbringing. We call that political socialization, technically. That is the process by which you gain your own values, beliefs, etc. And these have a lot to do with how people approach political parties and political agenda and how they address issues. And these issues are deeply influenced by a third factor, ideology. And these three factors seem to be moving in the direction of the AKP. They are tremendously favorable to the AKP. People have gone through a critical realignment of the vote right after the Cold War, starting in 1995. 1995 elections, we have data again in the pre-election survey. At that time, we conducted through another study, not with Ali Charkoğlu, but in that study it was very clear that the ideological map of the country changed dramatically. People shifted their mental maps from a central orientation to a right-wing orientation. And that right-wing orientation changed from 1995 up until today, stayed more or less the same. So up until 1995, approximately 25% of the people were registering themselves on the right, about 22-25% on the left, and the rest about 50-55% in the middle. In 1995, we for the first time discovered that the middle started to diminish in size from 55% to about 35%, and that 20% moved to the right. And that has increased. By 2011, we have about 55% of the people registering themselves as right-wingers, self-reported registration, actually. And that is where the AKP seems to be. As a result of which, their ideological position is immaculate, and they have also helped to sort of create this current become sustainable. My humble opinion, I've written in that book also, is that this is a generational phenomenon. So for one generation, starting 1995, for about 25, 30 years, Turkey will be ruled by right-wing mentality, by voters who themselves are right-wing. Previously, Turkey had been ruled by right-wing political parties, but people were not necessarily that much on the right. They consider themselves to be sort of centrist, strategically voted for the right. We're not there any longer. We have right-wing voters voting for right-wing political party. And it's become so predominant that we have one political party winning elections and no other seems to be in a position to challenge it for the foreseeable future. So Turkey seemed to have moved into what Duverger originally and then Giovanni Sartori of Columbia University in their seminal work on political parties called predominant party system. And this party system is dominated by the AKP now, and their voters are ideologically supporting this political party. Therefore, the very accountability of this party is debatable. So long as their conservative credentials are there, these conservative masses are going to vote for them unless the economy collapses. If the economy collapses or some other major mishap occurs, Turkey participates in a war and loses the war, or suddenly a part of Turkey secedes or what have you, and a large group of people blame the party in government for it, then this can change. But short of that, with this kind of right-wing mentality so well ingrained in the minds and hearts of people, I don't see any major change in the electoral statistics of Turkey in the near run. There can be some vicissitudes, but no major pattern change is likely to occur until we come to the next generation, come 2020, 2025, and not before than that. And it looks as if what we've been observing so far in these election studies seem to be also supporting this. Now this conservative mind is fed in Turkey to a certain extent by the same kind of conservative mind that is created anywhere in the world. Conservatism as an ideology emerged at the time of the French Revolution, not in France, but in Britain. Its first apostle was Edmund Burke, as you very well know, from Bristol. And he became an MP representing Bristol with a lot of sophistication and opinion, and made his ideas known, criticizing the French Revolution. And his basic arguments was crystallized under the influence of that event. And this is a time of change. So conservatism is a great reaction to what change produces: uncertainty. A lot of these people in Turkey are faced with uncertainty. A lot of them have found themselves thrown out of their nests in the rural society, into the urban environment, into a new framework in which they are totally alien, and they are faced with a shock of their life. And in a matter of about 60 years, approximately 60% of the population in Turkey changed places. And the urban areas are now depleted of population. There are less than 20% of the population living in the rural areas now. Urban areas have about 80% plus population. And this is in the 1-2 generations experiencing this phenomenon. And these people faced with this kind of uncertainty also experienced the downfall of the Cold War, Soviet Union collapse, socialism allure completely gone, all left-wing thinking collapsed in this process, nothing to be salvaged. And let me tell you, Turkish voters are no different than any other voters, including American voters. We don't have philosophers voting. These people simply are empiricists. They look at the world and they make their own simplistic arguments out of it, and therefore they simply sow no option on the left, as a result of which the left collapsed in Turkey, and there is a big crisis of paralysis of any kind of social democratic left, etc. idea, and uncertainty pushed these people in the direction of something that they could anchor themselves to and can create some certainty, and that is religion. And religion played this role in Britain at the time of Edmund Burke, and in the United States right now is still playing a major role in the Tea Party movement and elsewhere, especially in the Republican Party. It's playing a major role in Turkish conservatism as well. And that religion, of course, is Islam in this country, and one sect of Islam, Sunni Islam, and that is playing a major role holding these people together, helping them to network, motivating these people to work together, and at the same time providing them an alternative basis to the order that they had seen as alien to them. Therefore, they find this order as illegitimate. They do not attach themselves to it. They're anti-constitutional, anti-legal, and we observe therefore a lot of anomie, rulelessness. They simply ignore these rules, and it's very easy to make these arguments today that the decisions made on many issues by the courts had been made earlier. These are courts of the 28th of February process. Therefore, their decisions were not legal. And the courts now are, of course, democratic courts established by the AKP, so their decisions are legal, in a sense. So we have to respect these, respect the previous court orders, and that is the sort of situation that obviously creates an enormous problem of deviating from the norms of rule of law, because in both circumstances, both previously and under AKP, Turkey had been and still is part of the Council of Europe, European Convention of Human Rights, and Turkish courts are judged by the European Court of Human Rights, and that judgment indicates that Turkey's record is awful, and is still awful, has not improved under AKP's democratic reforms and democratic packages. Still, I'm still expecting an improvement in that. And we'll see whether these new courts will provide any kind of improvement in these performances. I doubt it very much, because they seem to be operating with the same kind of callousness towards basic principles of rule of law, starting with habeas corpus. I mean, the very circumstances of arrest very start of that, handling of evidence, etc. We have not had any improvement in that. In fact, we have started to slide backwards in these regards, in spite of the fact that there is so much hype and spin doctors are pushing into our ears so much propaganda that Turkey is becoming more democratic every day. It looks as if we're not going in that direction. So conservatism is creating this mindset that the ancien regime, the order that had existed before 2002 was not legitimate. Their orders should not be heeded. Therefore, you simply disregard the laws, and no new laws are handed down to them yet. And therefore, in this vacuum, you operate in an environment of anomie. And that seems to be a basic chunk in that, among the dimensions of conservatism. And finally, of course, there's a lot of parochialism and chauvinism and xenophobia attached to it. And we see many examples of that in the Turkish values surveys, in the ISSB surveys, European Social Survey, applications in Turkey, etc. There's very little tolerance for dissent, very little tolerance for anything foreign, very little trust in foreigners and strangers, etc. And that seems to be also building into this conservative mindset of seeing the other as the enemy and suspecting all foreigners as being enemies of Turkey and easily castigating them in that kind of image. And therefore, when you have speculations about the culprits of the Gezi events, the foreigners, we have had a long list. It looks like a sad list so far as I'm concerned, from agents of Secret Service from various countries to even Lufthansa, because it was threatened by the plan of a new airport to be built near Istanbul, which would undermine Frankfurt's status of being the hub of Europe, and therefore Lufthansa have been creating these circumstances in Turkey. If Lufthansa can do that, there is no way that Lufthansa can lose any money anytime soon. But this is a sort of xenophobic environment in which we operate, and these kinds of ideas sell enormously easily. And of course, these kinds of ideas are at the same time terribly dangerous, leads to attacks on foreigners from time to time, and leads to various uproars against allies of Turkey, and creates interesting sort of zigzags in Turkish foreign policy and makes a mess of it all at the same time. So that's where we seem to be spending so far as conservatism is concerned. So it's not increasing, it's not decreasing, it's there, it'll be with us for a generation. We are a terribly conservative society, and we are moving in the direction of conservatism until about probably the third decade of the 21st century. And then the next generation may even be more conservative for a change. We'll discover that when the time comes.
Great. We'll go back to that 1995 comment. I'm curious what happened in 1995, but let me go through my questions, continuing with Sayın Yesillada. On your blog, paraborsa.net, you wrote about the democratic reform package that was recently rolled out. Tell us about that. What is the current environment in Turkey, and whether or not this package will ease the tensions, and whether or not it will satisfy the needs of different fractions such as Kurds, Alawites, LGBT community, and women's rights groups, or is it a dog and pony show and it has no significant impact? But please wait so I can ask the question to the folks behind me. So the question is about the reform package that is recently rolled out. I'm asking whether or not this will satisfy the constituencies such as Kurds, Alawites, LGBT community, and women's rights groups, or is it just a scene? And what is the current environment in Turkey after this package? Thank you.
Thank you, Kürşat. Let me make a few comments about Gezi Park and the economy, if I may do so. Well, in fact, let me make a few comments on Mr. Kalaycioglu's very astute observations. To me, the major problem in Turkish democracy is not a lack of supply, but a lack of demand, to put it in economist terms. Democracy is like sex. You have to have a lot of experience to get good at it. And Turks never had that chance, really. I mean, the choice of having a republic rather than continuing the empire and then switching to a multi-party democracy were not in reaction to public demands, but essentially decrees or one-person decisions. For most Turkish people, they are completely in the dark as to what a modern democracy is and how that could benefit them. But that presents a very interesting anomaly in the Turkish stage of development. One of the lasting achievements of AKP is to add Turkey, to join Turkey to the global capitalist marketplace. We are part of the global supply chain. We are firmly a capitalist society. We're a capitalist society where the social and political order is completely out of sync with the needs of a capitalist society. We have a political system that has 4 ideological parties. It is not clear which party represents what economic classes. Who stands for labor in Turkey? Who stands for capitalists? Who stands for small businesses? These issues are not even discussed. This is one thing that will have to be changed pretty soon if we wish to stay in the global capitalist society. My video is gone, by the way. Is that a problem?
We hear you.
Okay. The second problem is, as I've said earlier, as people move to urban areas and become acquainted with the internet and satellite TV, etc., they discover a new world. They also realize that economic achievement is not enough to guarantee happiness in life. They will need more. They do need more. This has nothing to do with the conservative or liberal or orientation of the society. This has something to do with the increased life standards and the proliferation of consumer demands, which also apply to politics as well as economics. So, to me, it is very unclear whether AKP can maintain the current order that it has established into the next 2 decades, even if the society becomes more conservative. Because there is a difference between conservatism and authoritarianism. You don't have to be authoritarian to be conservative. I think, to be more specifically, the trial by fire for AKP will come if Mr. Erdogan decides to run for the presidency and doesn't entrust the party to Mr. Gül. There are already several interest groups within AKP that are competing for power. And if Mr. Erdogan thinks he can manage the affairs of these factions from the presidential palace, he's fooling himself. Life doesn't work that way. It is quite possible that if he chooses to become president within the next 5 years, we will see a massive power struggle in AKP, or even some splintering of the current Turkish political alignment to start from AKP. Now, Professor Kalaycioglu made another interesting point. Voters in Turkey, but all across the world, are conservative. AKP delivers a good thing. I think all the 3 gentlemen in this panel have suffered tremendously in the repeating financial and economic crises of 1990s. One thing that so endears AKP to the voters is that economic growth may accelerate or decelerate, but we didn't have the 2001 type of crises over the last decade. And that's something that's worth preserving for the voters. But it is very unlikely that Turkey's success in the last decade will continue within the next 10 years. The primary reason for that is that the architect of the success was not Mr. Erdogan, but was Mr. Bernanke. In no near in recent history, Turkey never had such a favorable external backdrop to stimulate its growth. Essentially, we had no credit restrictions. The world was begging to lend to us, and we used that money to build highways and bridges, huge residential complexes, as well as some industrial capacity. That world will end sometime in January or March when Fed starts exiting what we call the quantitative easing program. Within 2 years, say by 2016, the world will achieve a stage that we call monetary normalization, where monetary policy will be conducted via interest rates. These changes are devastating to Turkey's economic growth, which is solely built on the availability of cheap and ample credit. Once the credit constraints becomes binding again, we will see one of the several scenarios. A, at that time, Turkey's economic imbalances will have progressed so far that we'll have a balance of payment crises that may pull down several financial or corporate institutions behind it. Two, more likely, we will have a period of double-digit inflation driven by currency weakness, and a period that may last about 5 years or so of subnormal growth. I'm talking about Turkey needing at least 3 years of 1% growth, certainly no more than 2%, to reduce its foreign borrowing requirement to the new age that I'm describing. That's not my personal viewpoint. I mean, IMF says that, Goldman Sachs says that. Anyone who thinks about these matters agrees that Turkey's economic model, and in particular, Turkey's external financing requirements cannot be sustained, even in the short term. One reason why AKP is also so popular with the voters is not as necessarily the economic success it delivered, but its establishment of a vast welfare network supported by Sunni congregations on the side. Essentially, with the exception of virgins, every identifiable interest group in society draws a stipend from AKP. Anyone over the age of 65, widows, university students, high school students, the poor, the indigent, everybody gets paid by the AKP. This system has become increasingly expensive from a budgetary viewpoint. One reason why our budget debt is not pushing us towards the kind of fiscal cliff that America has been experiencing is because of privatization and because of other asset and franchise sales. But that era has ended. Briefly speaking, there are very good reasons to think that one of the main pillars of AKP's political success, that of economic growth, will not be present within the next 10 years, which is also a nice bridging point to your question, the reform package. Again, this is not my opinion, but to the extent they decided to speak on it, Alawite organizations and all the Kurdish actors involved in the peace process rejected it, either in polite terms or in extremely impolite terms. It is very clear that AKP's world vision, democratic vision, doesn't afford social space to the Alawites and to the Kurds as they desired. There's another problem here. Turkey's Sunni conservatives and nationalists, which are aptly present in the constituencies of AKP, reject to acknowledge the Alawite and the Kurdish realities. This will have to change. Turkey doesn't have as much time left as it did before the Arab Spring to address the plight of these two large minorities, never mind the Gezi Park, the women and the other peaceful marginal groups in the Turkish society. The whole Alawite problem become much more prominent and much more urgent, because thanks to Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey, the Muslim in Middle East has been polarized along the Shia and Sunni axes. It is very clear that Alawite are not the Shia. I'm never suggesting that. The similarities between them can be argued, but it's clearly they are not Sunnis and they don't fit well into the Sunni axis. The same problem exists with Kurds as well. The Kurdish problem has become a four-country problem. Kurds realize their ethnic identity and their common aspirations. I think the war in Rojava, Western Syria, largely organized thanks to AKP sending in militants for al-Nusra and ISIS, has galvanized the common nationality and ethnic backgrounds of Kurds. These two groups will not wait long. The first has already joined Gezi Parkı and will agitate even faster if its demands are not addressed within a year or so. With Kurds, time is running short as well. If PYD wins the war in Rojava, kicking out the Al-Qaeda fanatics and establishes an autonomous region, we will have two prototype Kurdish states at our border who offer those who wish to live their Kurdishness excellent opportunities. There is something called the law of one price in economics. The same good cannot be sold at two different prices in similar locations. In terms of Turkey's Kurdish problem, the law of one price will apply very soon. That is, you cannot have Kurdish-speaking and relatively democratic, or at least free societies to the south of the border, while in Diyarbakir, Hakkari, etc., people are strip-searched by Gendarmerie 3 times a day and are denied their basic rights, like the right to educate their children in their own language, the right to qualify for the parliament. That would be, in addition to the economic malaise that's awaiting Turkey, the Alawite and the Kurdish problems will become the second major threat to AKP's unquestioned dominance on Turkish politics. AKP and, more broadly speaking, the Sunni Turkish majority are not ready to accept that we are a multicolored, multi-ethnic, and multi-sectarian society. But the world does. Our immediate neighborhood does. Either we go by the times or something has to change.
Sayın Yesillada, we don't see you. Can you please hit the video button on your
No,
screen?
unfortunately, the video is okay. Well, let me see.
We hear you loud and clear.
Oh, it is working. I'm sorry. You know, I'm a technological Neanderthal. Forgive me. Here we go.
And I apologize, I did not introduce myself. My name is Burak Bakan. I'm the president of Turkish American Gezi Platform.
So why are you parading as Kürşat Uvez?
Yeah, Kürşat, he's our technology director. You're getting a text from
Oh, I'm
him.
sorry. I'm sorry.
So
Yeah, underneath your video, it says Kürşat Uvez. Never mind.
my
We're all
fault.
paranoid in Turkey. Don't worry about it. Don't answer.
It's my fault. Nothing to worry. So I'll continue with Sayın Sozen.
Yeah, I can't hear you very well right now, so if you could spell it out nicely.
Sure. The Gezi movement morphed into a political party. We heard a party is launched or being launched called Taksim Gezi Partisi. Our question is, can they carry on the Gezi spirit? And can they gain broad support? Or will they remain as a marginal political party? And do you think Gezi's movement revitalize the opposition party? But let me ask this question to
Sure, I can't hear almost at all anymore your question. I can hear the other speakers, but I can't hear you.
Let me repeat again then. Let me repeat slowly. Is it better now?
Maybe when you are reading for the audience, I can follow your question.
Okay.
Okay? Yeah.
So my question is, can the Gezi movement morph into a political party? And whether or not the new party that is being launched, Taksim Gezi Partisi, reflect and opinions of and carry on the spirit of the Gezi movement, and whether or not the Gezi movement can revitalize the opposition party CHP. How was that?
Okay. I think I didn't get very well, but I think it has been going on for a while from your side. When you talk, I can't hear very well, but I heard woman a couple of times. Is that the code word? But I wanted to say a couple of things about Ersin Kalaycioglu's comments and a couple of things about the possible outcomes from Gezi. Is that relevant to your question?
We'll text the question to you.
Yeah, that's good, right? Okay. So first of all, what Ersin Kalaycioglu said is that there is this big conservative population, and then our Turkish voters are more on the right, which of course does not necessarily lead to authoritarianism. And what I would like to discuss a little bit why it led to authoritarianism. It does not need to lead to authoritarianism, but it led to authoritarianism. First of all, not all hegemonic party systems necessarily go into authoritarianism. One party may win election after election, like in Sweden, like in Japan, a bit more problematically. But it doesn't necessarily lead to lack of democracy. What we need is for any democracy to survive is we need real conflict. Political elite, there should be avenues for conflict between political elite. If there is there is too much harmony, if there is no oppositional conflictual voices, then you will not have democracy. This is what I kind of want to elaborate a little bit on, because what democracy is not is what majority of Turkish citizens thought what democracy is. Democracy is not the reflection of popular will in power. Milli iradenin yönetime yansıması. It's not a reflection of popular will in power. It is actually the people's power. It is actually this conception of reflection of popular will in power is actually a very perverse understanding of democracy, which if it becomes powerful, leads to authoritarianism. So it's a threat against democracy, not a definition of democracy. So what democracy is democracy is a political system where political elites compete and conflict with each other. And where does the power of the people come from then in this system? If it's all about political elite, the power of the people come from the conflict that they engage in. When they conflict, when political elite can conflict with each other, they fight with each other. If political power can be opposed, then there are going to be avenues of dissent and avenues for the citizens to make themselves heard. So otherwise, you are going to have the authoritarianism of executive, authoritarianism of elected executive. And elected executive, like elected prime minister for Turkish form of government, elected executive is actually a dangerous form of authoritarianism because it's also popular. If you are elected, it's also popular. So if I kind of tie up what I said with what Ersin Kalaycioglu said, it's not enough to win election after election to become authoritarianism. These elections in the Turkish political institutional setup, which was from 1980 on, from 1982 in 82 constitution, already executive-centric, already was giving too much power to the central authority and prime minister's office. or minister cabinet. It was already giving too much power to it. Party wins election after election, but more important than that, the ideology of the party is also extremely majoritarian. I don't like that word majoritarian, but that's actually populist ideology, which means that they are they argue that democracy is the reflection of the popular will in power. So popular will can be represented in populism, and it is represented by the prime minister's office. So if you represent the popular will, then there should not be any checks on your power. Any check on your power, even if it is democratic, then it's construed in populist ideology as authoritarian. So progressively using this perverse conception of democracy, AKP eradicated constitutional checks in front of it and enlarged, for example, 2010 referendum is a perfect example of it. They kind of enlarged their power over judiciary. Actually, the judicial checks don't exist anymore in Turkey, and they kind of like could suffocate the opposition through these checks, like by imprisoning them, by getting rid of the oppositional media, etc., etc. So, what is authoritarianism? What caused authoritarianism is not pure majority, obviously. It's how majority manifested itself in a constitutional setup, political institutional setup, that was already tilting towards giving more power than necessary in a democracy to government. So what should we expect? What happened in Gezi that we can construe as gains of Gezi? Right? That's what I'm going to say. Like, I kind of heard a couple of women, but I kind of women, but I will stick to my guns. And in terms of voters, obviously, and in terms of the power structure, Gezi did not change anything. Immediately, in the short term, it did not change anything. What it created is, it created a narrower legitimacy base for AKP. That's what the gain of Gezi is. So if you are looking for immediate implications of Gezi in terms of vote percentages, there are polls out there, it doesn't look like it. The power of the executive, which is basically the source of authoritarianism in the Turkish case, did not decrease at all. There is no more constitutional autonomy. There is no more freedom of press, etc., etc. So nothing democratic is interjected into the system concretely after the Gezi events. What happened though? What is a potential positive change in terms of Turkish democracy? Is that the hegemony of AKP over what democracy is, over the definition of democracy, is shattered. So now, until 2010, until Gezi, democracy for the large segments of the Turkish population, AKP supporters and AKP opposers. But think of yourself 5 years ago, what you were thinking when you think of what democracy is. It was much more common in Turkey that democracy is the popular reflection of popular power in government. So that perverse authoritarian-leaning democracy conception is now very nicely confronted by a more liberal political democracy, which includes some conflict in power, something like there should be freedom of press, right? Like if you think about it, like a number of people who were blaming Aydın Doğan after the tax penalties that he received in 2009, I think, that they were saying that he was complicit in the previous regimes, like all those authoritarian acts, etc., etc. He was complicit in this, that, and other. All those people, like all of a sudden, realized that actually you need an oppositional press, no matter how bad it is. You need a press that will be able to reveal some weakness of the government. If you don't have it, then all those people who were supporting the initial tax break and they were applauding it went ahead and protested the fact that Aydın Doğan's channel showed penguins after the Gezi Park. So what I'm trying to say is that, like, the change of conception of democracy, it really happened, and it will have real repercussions. For example, from now on, we will not see yetmez ama evet, yes but not type of positions, which supports the government increasing its government increasing in power in the name of democracy. If you want to support democracy, you do not support government increasing its power. You support avenues of dissent. You support avenues of opposition. If you start supporting government in the name of democracy, then you create an authoritarian power. So what happened is that with yes but not enough type of political positions, they created a more authoritarian regime in the name of democracy. Now we won't have that type of positions anymore because everybody knows in Turkey that government, too powerful, is a liability in a democracy. So you need liberties for democracy. Now people start to associate democracy with liberties. Now people start to associate democracy with checks on the government. These are actually quite interesting and quite new phenomena for Turkey. Turkish experience of democracy is quite long, by the way, compared to its third world counterparts. But so another, like for example, like AKP lost its power on the on this alluring concept democracy, and which that means it's gonna have much more troubles carrying out large constitutional changes in Turkish politics anymore. Like for example, in 2010, a judicial ally, like they got rid of the judicial supervision over them. They managed it with large legitimacy that they had in the segments of the population that did not directly support them. But now, with the presidentialism discussions, it's going to have much more trouble. Unless it has the constitutionally required seats in the parliament, it will probably not be able to craft new allies from other groups that are not directly related to AKP. So presidentialism dreams of AKP is probably at least vain for sure, unless it wins more than like 2/3 of the seats in the parliament. Also, AKP's vulnerability to economic crisis. If you lose your hegemony or ideological hegemony, if you lose your power to determine what is right, what is wrong in terms of political regime, then you are going to be much more vulnerable to economic crisis as well. And they may not be able to hold on to their political base as well anymore if after Gezi events, if there is an economic crisis. And second, it relates to your first question that you asked to me, is that internal dissension is a real possibility now if there is an economic crisis. So something like within the political party, if the pie is getting bigger, or if there is quite a bit of political benefits to distribute, it's gonna be a big major disincentive to major disincentive to major disincentive to confront the leader. Now, in terms of Gül and Erdogan bifurcation, it is possible, not now because pie is still quite big. And if there is a presidential system debate, then that may create a bigger problem. But if pie starts to shrink with economic crisis, it's going to be much harder to rule. So under AKP after Gezi is not going to be able to rule or manage the country as well as it did before. It doesn't mean that its power directly and immediately is going to go down, but it is now the party that rules not the whole Turkey, but a segment of Turkey, for the interest of the segment of Turkey. That's a big loss for a governing party. It's going to be much harder to manage conflict for them from now on. That's what I like. It's too optimistic maybe, but that's what I kind of believe ideological changes lead to. All right, that's it. So for taking too long.
No, I hate to interrupt, but to stay with our schedule, I'll ask last questions, and if you can please answer within 5 minutes, we can let you go to sleep before midnight in Turkish time, and we can continue with our program here today. I'll ask...
We bet tomorrow is the workday, you know.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
Tomorrow is a regular business day,
yes,
so
yes.
we better...
Yeah, yes, I know, thank you. We believe me, we do appreciate your participation. Sayın Kalaycioglu, I'd like to ask you, and last questions again, relation between the Fethullah Gülen movement, otherwise known as Cemaat, and the AKP, do they help each other, or is there tension? And since we're approaching a busy election season, how will this play out?
I will go into that. I mean, Fethullah Gülen movement itself, through various ads, explained their position and then simply negated that there is any major conflict between themselves and the AKP. So we should take their word for it as such. But their media seem to be critical of the foreign policy followed by the AKP government, especially in the Middle East. Therefore, it looks as if there are some disagreements on various issues between especially the media of the Gülen movement and of the government. That is very visible, very much out there. So there's no question about it. How far deep this runs is anybody's guess, because we don't have the likes of a political party here, so we can't make this kind of argument very openly. As far as I can tell, essentially they are for a regime which gives more say to those groups that had not been actively included in the system, and they're for excluding those political forces that had been effective, such as the military, in the decision-making previously. So there doesn't seem to be any kind of difference between them. But the part of the question that Yunus couldn't hear, I heard, that I would like to respond at this moment also. For any political party to be established and provide a challenge in the system, there is a huge threshold, not only the 10% threshold nationally, which the current protest movement with 2.5 million participants, okay, multiply them by 2, say, about 5 million. That makes barely about 9% or so of the vote. And that cannot qualify for a very strong challenge to the AKP government. Therefore, building and sustaining a political party is a very difficult thing, and it will be an uphill battle. It'll be very, very difficult, very costly. The costs are tremendously high. So I don't expect an easy mobilization of this group into a political party. Besides, this was a interest group activity, more like a pressure group activity, rather than a political party activity. It's issue-based, more focused on some, what we may call post-material issues, lifestyles, liberties, civil liberties, crony capitalism damage and threat to cities, history, etc. These are, of course, events with which American public has been very familiar with since the 1950s and 60s, but they are new issues for Turkish politics. And again, various surveys, especially the World Values Survey and the Turkish Values Survey have been conducted to track all of this, failed to register any major change in the sensitivities of the public in any major way. Therefore, I don't believe that this is a big enough platform to make changes. However, what Yunus Sozen argued about creating doubts in the minds of the people of AKP's message, it is there. Their old image is, to a certain extent, shattered. How lethal that shattering was is very difficult to guess at the moment. They're trying to regain lost territory. We will see whether they have regained that territory or not in the coming elections, and that is the real test. Before that, it's very, very premature to make any such arguments about their loss of grip under these circumstances. But they are not terribly safe, but where they're standing, I mean, the cushion around them, the large masses that they can mobilize on the basis of sect and ethnicity, and those variables also seem to be providing these social conditioning and political socialization tremendously in Turkey. Major variable influencing the vote through party identification, etc. Those variables are moving in the direction of the AKP still, and they can easily mobilize that. My basic evidence for that is the issue of the head cover for women, turban. They're bringing it up again, and that is now becoming a central issue. And that central issue, again, divides society sharply, something like 35 to 65 or 30 to 70%, and the majority safely supporting AKP on that issue. And on that basis, if they were able to start their campaign, they will be again creating very strong stimulus for their followers not to deviate from the line and endanger their lifestyles and endanger the goodies that they have been receiving from this political party as such. And we'll see whether this message is going to work or not in a very short while, several months into the elections.
Thank you. Sayın Yesillada, you mentioned maybe in the next spring we could see even bigger events, if I understood that correctly. What makes you say so? Tell us about what the next 12 months or 6 months would look like in your crystal ball. But let me ask that question to the crowd really quick. So Sayın Yesillada mentioned next spring we could see even bigger events. I just want him to expand on it.
I think, first of all, I want this audience and my fellow panelists to understand just how reliant on the goodwill of international fund managers the Turkish economy is. Let me just give you a few basic numbers. Turkey needs to find at least $220 billion a year in terms of foreign financing to maintain a slow growth rate of 3%. Anything less than that, either Turkey has a recession or we have a currency crisis. The Turkish lira depreciates very significantly. One area where AKP's violent reaction to Gezi Parkı, and it is erratic behavior after that, has destroyed or at least undermined confidence is with the international fund management community. By late summer, the bastion of fund management community, Bloomberg, was headlining articles with titles like, "Has Erdogan become completely unhinged?" Which is a pretty tough word to say for a democratically elected leader of a large economy. I have talked to people who participated in the IMF World Bank autumn meetings in Washington, and there is a broad spread agreement that Turkey's economic response to the ongoing or soon to start Fed taper is completely inadequate. Central bank's monetary policy is viewed as complete madness. AKP's democratic credentials and its ability to focus away from elections and politics to the much needed productivity enhancing reforms are questioned. In that sense, Gezi Parkı had a very lasting impact, and if it blows or if it flares up again, we would see a massive impact first on the financial markets, then on the real economy. Now, as to why I think Gezi Parkı will repeat soon, there are several reasons. First, what we see on the streets is only the tip of the iceberg. The real conversation, debate, is happening over the social media. And clearly, people's angers are increasing by the day. There are, I don't follow every strain of thought on Facebook, but there are 3 distinct campaigns which have become a permanent feature of the social media. First, people put TC, Republic of Turkey, in front of their names. Two, they call themselves Çapulcus, vandals, just like Erdogan labeled the Gezi Park people. Three, there has been a massive backlash for AKP's decision to abolish the Pledge of Allegiance in our schools. I'm not saying, you know, it was right or wrong. As far as I'm concerned, it was right. But the Gezi Park people are there. The issues that galvanized Gezi Park are still present, as my fellow panelists have said. Only last night, the police and the municipality bulldozers moved into the private forest of Middle East Technical University and you know, raised over 3,000 trees. There is almost a martial law in major Alevite districts in Ankara and in Istanbul. The press simply doesn't report the smaller scale public unrest in Turkey's border provinces to Syria or in the Kurdish provinces, which obviously, you know, the media doesn't report any of these things. One way AKP could win the March elections at the kind of margin that would make Mr. Erdogan comfortable to run for the presidency is, as again Dr. Kalaycioglu said, to push with its conservative agenda. More socially conservative measures will come to the fore, which will again anger people. By spring, we will see Alevites joining these protests in larger numbers, because remember, Erdogan promised in association with the reform package that soon more reforms will be announced, and one of which was supposed to be to address Alevite demands. Later on, we learned that this is not going to take place. So Alevites are really about to miss an opportunity. A once-a-century door has opened only to the Kurds. They are negotiating with our government for equal rights and an end to discrimination. Alevites are not even mentioned. So either they squeeze in or they are left out forever. With respect to Kurds, really, BDP and PKK has withdrawn from the peace process. It's only Öcalan, for his completely private reasons, that's keeping the Kurds at home. But as the March elections approach, we'll see both PKK and the BDP galvanizing their constituencies to join the street movements, to raise the profile of BDP, and to test Öcalan's real popularity with the Kurdish population. As a result, I expect Gezi Park to continue. I think, just one more sentence, democracy is built bottom up. It's a matter of struggle. It cannot be granted. It cannot be legislated. Just like the pro-abortion fans or supporters in the United States have lost their ability to organize and to fight after Doe versus State, I believe, Doe versus United States, I don't know. The Turkish liberals, urbanites, people of all walks have lost their ability to fight because they have relied so long on the army and the secularist state. Now starts the hard struggle. I mean, we will have to build the democracy from the bottom up, stone by stone, street by street. It's going to take long. But Gezi Park was a milestone and it cannot be reversed.
Sayın Sozen, I hope you can hear me now.
I can hear you very well right now.
You can?
I can, yeah.
Okay, last question, and we only have a few minutes. I apologize, but it's also midnight in Turkey again. Why should a non-Turkish person among us care about this? We have many non-Turkish guests here. Why should they care about these events and democratization in Turkey within a few minutes? Thank you.
Okay, it's a hard question. I'm assuming if they are there, they care already. So But why their care is important, maybe I can answer. Why, if they care, it's important, I can answer. I believe that AKP's not only getting votes, but also hegemonizing, like completely controlling the Turkish political institutions, is partly related to EU's or Europeans and partly Americans' goodwill. Goodwill is a wrong term. Maybe I should use the word support, implicit support. Because I believe that when it comes to Turkey, actually, Europeans very much in line with AKP in terms of their understanding of democracy. EU kind of thinks that the real Turks, that is Sunni, conservative, religious, whatever, Turks should rule the Turkey, and that's the real Turkish democracy should be something like that, because they kind of imagine a Turk that is like that. And when they saw figures like, I don't know, Önder Sav or Onur Öymen, they didn't feel like the authentic people of Turkey was ruling Turkey. So when they look at AKP, they were seeing the real democratic force, the real force of the people, because it was fitting with their Orientalist image of what Turkey is. And that kind of cost Turkey quite a bit. As you know, like EU, for example, supported AKP's constitutional change in 2010 that eradicated the judicial independence. The reason for that was that judiciary was not elected, was not part of the real Turkish identity. They were like Kemalist, secular, alien from the Turkish culture, inauthentic, etc. And they kind of like should be if they go, it will be more democratic. And those kinds of supports, in the long run, I'm not saying saying anything about the voting percentages, but in the long run, those type of supports are important. And Gezi shattered that image of Europeans as well. They were surprised. They tried to do it again. They tried to formulate Gezi as secular versus Islamists, but they couldn't manage because people in Gezi did not allow it with their diversity, with their democratic demands. So it's possible that assuming they already care, it's possible that they will create in the long run some change if they believe that democracy in Turkey, like everywhere else, should include liberties and checks on the government. So that's my answer.
I'd like to add a few words because this is a very important question. I think some people see Turkey as a role model for the Middle East, etc., etc. I think what Turkey is a laboratory, and we're the guinea pigs. The world is rapidly heading towards what Huntington described as the clash of civilizations. The worldviews of the Muslim and the Judeo-Christian societies are perceived to be at such odds that eventually the Cold War will be replicated between the Muslim and Judeo-Christian societies. The place where you test this hypothesis is Turkey. If Turkey can build a multi-ethnic, multi-sectarian, tolerant society that is at peace with global capitalism and the values of the European community and the European Charter of Human Rights, etc., there would be hope for the future of the world. The Turkish example, obviously, with some degrees of variation, can eventually be emulated by the rest of the Muslim world. If Turkey fails, if Gezi Parkı fails, if we are condemned to be ruled to an authoritarian and Sunni rule for the next